Has anyone ever heard of the TV show called Connections? It was like started in the mid-'80s. It was this awesome BBC show with James Burke, who would make all of these like seemingly random connections come together into some technological advancement. It was a really cool show. I'm going to loosely try to follow that model today and kind of bring some things together that might not make much sense when I'm saying them, but at the end, there will hopefully be a good payoff. So, there are going to be 3 themes that I talk about. One is going to be competition, one is going to be architecture, one is going to be Halloween. So, start to make those connections as you may right now, and we'll see how that goes. So, competition. My story, personally, just so you have a chance to get a little bit to know about me, starts here on the tiny island of Guam, which you cannot see at this resolution, so we'll zoom in a little bit. That's how big Guam is. I was born on this tiny little city called Hagatna. My dad was in the Air Force, and my dad, I think, is the kind of reason why I am so competitive. I inherited some of that from him. And maybe this picture will show you how competitive he is. That's me. That's me maybe a day after I was born, and my dad is wearing a sweet bandana. He was a weightlifter in the Air Force and also studied Taekwondo. So we're a real fierce competitor, someone that I had to try to live up to, including that mustache. So before I could walk, I had wheels, even on my walker. And to me, wheels were always a really fun way to compete, whether it was driving cars or racing bicycles or whatever. I always dreamt about drag racing as a little kid, obviously, but kids can't drive cars. So I had my sweet tricycle, which was my favorite ride of the time. I would dare anyone to race who wanted to challenge me. But that tricycle was kind of slow. It was Model 1, needed to upgrade. So I got my sweet big wheel. I was prepping, after all, for a competition that was coming up called the annual Toddlers Classic. And this was going to be my winning vehicle. Notice the circumference around that big front wheel. Might have a slower off-the-line speed, but eventually top-end speed is going to catch up to him. Like anyone that gets ready for race day, I was getting some sweet tunes to pump me up, and I knew that that number 1 spot at the Toddlers Classic was going to be mine. Here's an actual clipping. As the reporter says, enthusiasm was high Sunday as the Youth Activities Center hosted the annual Toddlers Tricycle and Hot Wheels race. Race number 2, a 50-yard course for 3-year-olds, was a 4-way duel for top honors. Challenging for first place was Millicent Smith, Casey Wheeler, Justin Roberts, and Patrick Hyatt. In a very hard-fought race, Justin crossed the finish line in 27.8 seconds, with Patrick right on his heels. Suck it, Patrick Hyatt. So, when I stepped up to receive my trophy, I looked the presenter right into his dead eyes, and I knew that I was hooked on competing. Skeletor, if anyone doesn't know. So, part 2, architecture. Pretty big jump. Fast forward 15 years to Arizona. We moved away from the beautiful island paradise of Guam into the desert of Arizona. And I started college at ASU studying architecture. Again, super competitive program, really fun to compete against people and present your ideas and get everything ripped apart and come back stronger. I really fed off that. And I learned some really good skills for being able to visualize things and build them in the physical space, which is something that I really enjoy doing. I learned AutoCAD and 3D modeling programs like SketchUp, which I use for everything. This is a design for my deck that I built. This is my house and yard mocked up in 3D so I could test the shade falling on my windows so I knew where to plant my trees. Learned a lot of really valuable stuff from architecture. Some of the most basic things that I learned were how to use really simple materials to make really awesome things. So these were like my big three, just white glue, X-Acto knives, and foam core. You could make anything with them. Using these to build models was like the Karate Kid painting a fence for hours on end, although you can't cut your finger with a paintbrush. And I did cut my finger with an X-Acto knife many times. So after you log hours and hours and hours and change out hundreds and hundreds of blades, because after every 10 cuts you have to change your blade out to get a perfect line and avoid criticism from your professors, you become like a ninja at slicing foam core. It just becomes second nature. And we'll find out why that becomes important to me when we talk about Halloween. So how does Halloween fit in with my competitive nature and this love of building things with foam core? Well, basically, Halloween is this awesome holiday where you can act like a kid and go out in public and dress up, which is super fun sometimes. And it also has this really competitive side. There are Halloween costume competitions, things that you can go enter. And I had made costumes in the past, but I really wanted to compete in something and try to win with all of these sweet skills that I had. So how could I continue to use those X-Acto knife-wielding skills to do this? I dove back into my 6-year-old brain for inspiration. This is me and my brother in my Transformers tent that attached to my bed. I was in love with Transformers as a child of the 80s. So I thought maybe I could do a Transformer. Maybe Optimus Prime, maybe Bumblebee, I don't know. And then I thought there was a robot that I loved even more than all the Transformers. Voltron. Especially growing up in Guam, like anime was huge over there since we were so close to the Philippines and Japan. So this was like number one on my list, something that I wanted to do. But then there was this little part of my adult brain that was like, it's a little childish. Even though it would be awesome, there's got to be something else that I can build to compete. So I got the perfect idea, and then I started sketching it out. So, for those of you who do not know, this is an all-terrain scout transport, an ATST. It's a vehicle that is most prominently featured in Star Wars: Return of the Jedi, the weakest of the original trilogy, but still an awesome vehicle. It's the one with the Ewoks. This thing can walk around, has cool guns, can do all kinds of cool stuff. So I was trying to figure out how I can build this so that I could run around and go compete in Halloween costume contests. So I needed to do some research. I found the original plans that were used to build the full-scale model of the ATST for the film. And then using some Photoshop magic, mocked them up into something that I felt would be a good template to start building this costume. Drawing back on my SketchUp and 3D modeling skills from architecture, I built scale templates that would allow me to build pieces of this with sort of mass production processes to kind of have this giant thing come to life. So I turned to my good old friend foam core, bought in bulk, and decided I would build this thing entirely out of foam core and glue. And it started coming together really well. There's the head kind of starting to make its shape. And then the legs starting to come together, all fully functional with elastic suspension systems so that the legs moved just like the ones in the movie did. Took a lot of film time researching the movement of these. So it started to actually look like an ATST walker, like to scale, something that I could wear and actually fit through a door and go to competitions. So there I am on the right, wearing it and running around, kind of like a test run before I took it out to the big competitions. So I was ready for a live audience. And I felt like the best first live audience would be my place of work. So I put my ATST costume on and popped out of the elevator at the office and started walking around the office just so people could see what it looked like. And as you can see by all of the people videotaping me, it was pretty popular. So I thought, all right, this is pretty good. Like, people love it. I'm definitely going to do pretty well. There it is in all of its glory. It was pretty fun. So I decided to take it out onto the streets on Halloween night and go test it out. Went to a couple bars with my wife, walking around with me, making sure I didn't walk into any small children or poles, because I did have a limited field of view in there. And I ended up going to Casino, Arizona, which has this huge Halloween costume ball where there's like hundreds of people that register and you wait in line. And I, of course, couldn't wear it in line because it was too big to like maneuver for an hour and it was really hot. So I was like kind of saving it until the competition. I would register and then I would go put on the costume and then go compete. And looking at everyone, I thought I had a pretty good chance. I was like, I'm not seeing a lot of really good costumes out there. So I ran out to the car and unloaded it from the truck and like put it on. And then this guy shows up. A 10-foot tall bumblebee that shoots fire out of his hands. So the irony was very cruel. It was a cruel irony that this childhood franchise of mine had come to destroy me at the costume competition at the casino. So I was a little disappointed. My competitive ego was crushed. Although you can see that in this I am smiling. And that's because the sight of hundreds of fully adorned Grolt faces looking at you as you walk towards them down the street and realizing childhood fantasies of seeing one of these things walking in real life made it totally worth it. And I also never had to buy a beer the entire weekend.